Billionaire got home early, caught wife slapping Maid's daughter. His reaction left everyone stunned. "You filthy little brat, do you know what you've done?" David Prescott froze halfway into the marble foyer. He hadn't told anyone he was coming home early. The house, usually staged like a magazine spread, hummed with a sound he hadn't heard here before, a child's ragged, terrified sob. He followed it past the piano, past the curated vases and museum lighting, to the solarium where glass met ocean and secrets had nowhere to hide. Rebecca stood over a girl curled on the floor, one hand pressed to her cheek, the other trembling above a scatter of shattered porcelain. Chloe, Emily Carter's 9-year-old, looked tiny inside David's cavernous house. Rebecca's voice went ice cold. "People like you don't belong near beautiful things. You come from nothing, and you break what you touch." The girl flinched. Rebecca's hand flashed again. David stepped forward without thinking. "Enough!" Rebecca turned, startled. A beat of silence. Then the performance began, hand to her chest, wounded pride arranged on her perfect face. "David, thank God! She did this! She threw the statue! She tried to run when I—" Chloe shook her head so hard her braids slipped loose. No sound came out. He knelt by the child first. "Are you hurt?" She stared at him, wide-eyed and mute, the kind of silence that learns fast. Blood beaded at the corner of her lip. He pulled a linen handkerchief from his pocket, offered it, and only then looked at his wife. "I'll review the cameras," he said, voice level. A crack appeared in Rebecca's poise. "You don't need to." "I will." Emily hurried in, breathless, stopping short at the scene. "Chloe?" She dropped to her knees, gathering her daughter close. The girl finally found her voice, small, wrecked. She slapped me, Mommy." Rebecca scoffed. "Oh, please, I was disciplining her. Someone has to maintain standards in this house." David's gaze didn't move. "Standards aren't cruelty." For the first time in years, the house felt unfamiliar to him, as if the walls had been listening the whole time, storing what he'd been too busy to see. He straightened, every inch of him suddenly awake. "Go to my study," he told Rebecca. "We'll watch the footage together." She hesitated. "David, don't be dramatic." He opened the door and held it. "After you." The sobbing quieted. The ocean beat against the cliffs, and the man who built an empire on honor felt the ground shift under his own roof. Would he protect the truth now, or the perfect lie he'd been living? The Prescott estate had always looked like perfection carved in glass. From the driveway, the mansion shimmered over the Pacific cliffs, framed by white marble columns and manicured hedges that never dared grow wild. To the world, it was a symbol of David Prescott's precision, every leaf clipped, every angle symmetrical, every surface reflecting control. Inside, that control had become a language of silence. David climbed the curved staircase to his study, the echo of his footsteps swallowed by the carpet. He'd built this house 4 years ago, after his marriage to Rebecca. At the time, it had seemed like a dream, an empire of stability after years of chaos. He was a man who'd risen from nothing, who could turn failure into profit, who never made emotional decisions. But now, walking past portraits Rebecca had chosen, smiling, flawless versions of themselves, he saw something brittle in every frame. Rebecca had been beautiful from the start, poised, cultured, perfectly aware of the effect she had on people. She'd met him at a charity gala for children's hospitals. She'd been a donor, dressed in red silk, laughing softly at his dry jokes. He'd admired her confidence, her apparent warmth. Back then, he'd believed she wanted the same things: peace, family, meaning. He hadn't realized she wanted the appearance of those things, not their weight. He entered the study and turned on the monitor linked to the security feeds. The cameras were part of his life now, a habit that came after betrayal years before. Tonight, they became his witness. The footage confirmed what his eyes had already known. Rebecca's hand rising, Chloe's flinch, the porcelain shattering because Rebecca shoved the pedestal herself. Then the slap, sharp and deliberate. David leaned back in the leather chair, the blue light from the screen washing over his face. Somewhere behind him, Rebecca's heels clicked down the hallway. Her reflection appeared in the glass door. Perfect posture, perfect calm. "You're really going to believe a maid's child over me?" she asked. Her tone carried equal parts disbelief and disdain. He didn't turn. "I'm going to believe what I see." "David," she said softly, almost rehearsed, "I've worked so hard to make this house beautiful for you. I've supported you. I've been patient through all your business trips, your late nights." He stood, cutting her off. "You've been cruel when you thought no one was watching. That's not patience. That's rot." For a heartbeat, her mask slipped. Then she laughed, thin, brittle. "You're making a mistake. You think you're some kind of savior? When this gets out, people will know what kind of man you really are. You let a servant manipulate you." David walked to the window, looking out over the dark waves. "You still think this is about class. It's about humanity." Behind him, she went silent. For the first time since he'd known her, she didn't have a script ready. Downstairs, the quiet of the mansion began to shift. Emily was in the guest room with Chloe, holding her as she slept. The house, which had once felt frozen, now seemed to breathe differently, as though it too had waited years for someone to break the pattern. David stayed at the window long after Rebecca left. His reflection in the glass didn't look like the man who appeared in magazines. The tailored suit and the measured voice were still there, but the certainty was gone. He thought of his mother, a woman who'd scrubbed floors so he could go to school, and how she used to say, "You can always tell a man's worth by the way he treats the powerless." He had failed that test, until now. In the distance, the surf crashed harder against the cliffs. The wind pressed against the glass like a warning. For the first time, David wasn't thinking about shareholders or press releases. He was thinking about a terrified child who deserved safety, and about the woman who had tried to destroy it for sport. The illusion of a perfect marriage had cracked. What came next would not be quiet. But in that storm forming beyond the windows, David felt something he hadn't felt in years: clarity. He would no longer defend appearances. He would defend what was right. Morning came pale and cold over the ocean, but the house felt heavier than the sky outside. The staff moved quietly, afraid to make noise, their eyes darting toward the closed doors at the top of the stairs. Rumors traveled fast among servants. Rebecca had screamed for hours after the confrontation, and David had ordered her credit card suspended and her access to the house restricted. By noon, the tabloids already had whispers. Billionaire's wife accused of abuse in Prescott Mansion scandal. The article was vague, unconfirmed, but it spread like wildfire. David's phone buzzed constantly. Investors, board members, even friends who pretended concern but only wanted gossip. He answered none of them. At the breakfast table, untouched coffee cooled beside him as he stared at the screen. Rebecca swept into the room, sunglasses on despite the dim light, her composure restored like a mask painted over a crack. "You've humiliated me," she said evenly. "Do you understand what this looks like?" David looked up slowly. "It looks like the truth." She sat opposite him, crossing her legs. "The truth," she repeated, as if tasting the word. "The truth is that you've lost control. Your mother's background, that factory blood, it's finally showing. You think these people care about your morals? They care about perception." He studied her quietly. "Perception is how you fooled them for so long." Her jaw tightened. "If you think you can survive a divorce without me tearing your reputation apart, you're delusional." "I've survived worse," he said. "But you—" He leaned forward slightly, voice lowering to a steady calm. "You can't survive without being adored." Rebecca's eyes flashed. She stood, smoothing her blouse, and for the first time her voice cracked through the calm. "You'll regret this." Then she turned sharply and left the room. Emily appeared a moment later, hesitant, carrying a tray for Chloe's breakfast. Her eyes were downcast, her hands trembling slightly. David noticed. "You don't have to be afraid," he said softly. She shook her head. "I'm not afraid for me, sir. I'm afraid for her." "Rebecca won't touch her again," he promised. "I'll make sure of it." Emily nodded, eyes glistening. "Thank you, Mr. Prescott. You didn't have to—" "I did," he interrupted gently. "I should have seen it sooner." Outside, camera flashes erupted beyond the front gates. The reporters had arrived. Questions shouted through the intercom. "Is it true, Mr. Prescott? Did your wife attack a child? Will there be a lawsuit?" David ignored them, but Rebecca didn't. By afternoon, she stood before the iron gates in her designer dress, speaking to the press. "It's all been exaggerated," she said sweetly. "My husband and I are handling a misunderstanding privately." Her performance was perfect. Smiles, tremor in her voice, feigned sadness. But the moment she turned, her eyes caught the security camera perched above the door. The mask cracked for half a second. David watched from inside, silent. The staff behind him shifted uneasily. "Should I call security, sir?" one asked. He shook his head. "Let her talk. The more she talks, the more she shows who she is." That evening, the board of Prescott Global called an emergency meeting. The PR director warned him that shareholders were nervous. "If your wife takes this public, we'll have a scandal on our hands. People want stability, not sympathy." David listened without expression. When the director finished, he said quietly, "I built this company on honesty. If they can't handle that, they can leave." The room went silent. When he returned home that night, Emily was waiting near the kitchen, eyes tired but grateful. Chloe had fallen asleep on the sofa, clutching a stuffed bear he'd bought her that morning. "She keeps asking if she's in trouble," Emily said softly. "She's not," David answered. "Not anymore." He looked down at the child's peaceful face, a faint bruise still visible beneath her eye. A rush of guilt and resolve collided inside him. "I'll make this right," he whispered. Emily nodded, her voice barely audible. "Sometimes right things take courage, sir." He smiled faintly. "Then courage it is." When he turned out the lights, the sea crashed against the cliffs louder than before, as if the world itself was cleansing the lies. Upstairs, the marriage that once defined him was already dissolving in silence. But something new, fragile, honest, human, was beginning to take its place. The house slept under a bruised sky. David sat alone in his office, the glow of the fireplace trembling over glass and steel. On his desk lay a folded letter, his mother's handwriting, faded but still neat. He unfolded it carefully, as though it might shatter too. "Don't forget where you came from," it read. "If you ever stop seeing people as people, that's when you'll be truly poor." He had kept it all these years, tucked behind contracts and board minutes, yet never truly read it until now. The fire snapped, and the memory opened like a wound. He was 16 again, a boy in a gray jacket too big for his shoulders, standing beside his mother's mop bucket in the lobby of a law firm. The marble floors were slick with polish, reflecting chandeliers he'd never touch. She scrubbed while he studied, whispering formulas under her breath so he wouldn't feel guilty for staying late to use the building's Wi-Fi. One of the lawyers had once looked at him and said, "You'll never sit in a chair like this." He had smiled politely then. That smile had carried him through college, through startups, through deals that made his name a brand. He built everything on control, on the belief that if he worked hard enough, no one would ever make his mother bow again. But control had a cost. He thought of Eleanor, his first love, the woman who'd believed in the boy beneath the ambition. She used to joke that one day he'd be too rich to see her. When cancer took her, he buried himself in work until silence became habit. Then Rebecca had arrived, elegant, articulate, a distraction he mistook for healing. He told himself she was strength polished into beauty. In truth, she was everything he feared becoming, image without soul. A knock pulled him back. Emily stood hesitantly in the doorway. "Sir, I didn't mean to intrude." He gestured for her to come in. She carried a small tray with tea, and beside it, Chloe's drawing, a castle made of clouds. "She wanted you to have this," Emily said quietly. "She said it's for the man who protects people." David stared at the paper, the uneven lines, the heart drawn over the door. "She's very kind." "She just draws what she sees," Emily replied. When she left, he sat staring at the picture until his eyes blurred. The letter, the drawing, the fire, all whispered the same truth. He had spent his life building fortresses. What he needed now was to build a home. He closed the letter, folded it once more, and whispered to the empty room, "I won't fail them like I failed her." Outside, dawn began to rise, soft and clean. The tide pulled away from the rocks, leaving behind shells glinting in the pale light, proof that even the hardest storms eventually recede. The storm finally broke not with thunder, but with a phone call he answered. "Mr. Prescott, the board is assembling in an hour. They want reassurance." The PR director's voice carried the tremor of someone who lives by optics. David looked at the castle in crayon on his desk and felt something lock into place. He arrived to a wall of faces, screens glowing, a dozen polite crises stacked on an agenda. A partner cleared his throat. "We can weather this, David, if you maintain plausible deniability. A statement of regret without specifics. Keep it neutral. Protect the brand." He let the silence stretch until it felt like a held breath. "The brand is my name," he said. "My name doesn't hide behind euphemisms." A ripple. Someone tried again. "With respect, morality is messy on paper. If your wife—" "She is not my shield," David said, voice even. "A child was hurt in my house. We will state that I'm filing for divorce and cooperating fully with any investigation. We'll fund legal support and counseling for household staff across all our properties, effective today. If anyone here prefers a safer balance sheet over a cleaner conscience, the door is open." The room went still, the way an ocean goes still before it chooses a wave. Then the PR director closed her laptop. "I'll draft it," she said quietly. The partner who'd spoken first lowered his eyes. David stood, done asking for permission to be the man he was raised to be. Back at the mansion, he moved through rooms that finally felt like they belonged to him. "All exterior access revoked for Mrs. Prescott," he told security. "Her belongings will be inventoried. Council will coordinate pickup. Anyone who feels unsafe reporting past incidents, speak to HR. Your job is protected." Heads nodded, shoulders eased. He had not realized until that moment how many people had been holding their breath. He found Emily in the sunroom reading aloud to Chloe, who sat upright, brave and listening. "We're seeing the doctor," he said gently. "Today. Then a day off somewhere that doesn't echo." Emily blinked. "You don't have to." "I do," he said. "Sit with us, please." At the clinic, Chloe endured the lights and questions with a small iron courage. When the pediatrician asked if she felt safe at home, she looked to David. He didn't speak for her. He only reached out his hand. She took it and said, "Now I do." He swallowed hard and signed every form put in front of him. On the drive back, the ocean flung silver at the windows. David pulled off at a public beach, bought 3 paper cups of melting ice cream, and they sat on a low wall watching gulls bicker over nothing. Chloe's laughter came like a note he remembered from another life. Emily glanced at him, something like relief loosening her shoulders. He let the silence do the work, not performance, presence. That evening, Rebecca's lawyer called, voice lacquered and sharp. "Our client demands an apology for these defamatory insinuations." "Your client can read my statement at 8, David said. "She may also view the footage, the medical record, and the notice of separation. If she attempts to intimidate staff, I will file for a protective order within the hour." "You're risking—" "I'm choosing," he said, and ended the call. At 8, the statement went live. It was lean and unflinching. It offered no gossip and took no victory lap. It named the truth, named the steps, and named the commitment. Restitution where harm had been done. Protection where it should have always existed. The response flooded in. Shock, fury, applause, opportunism. But the only reply that mattered came from down the hall, where Chloe had taped her drawing to his office door and printed her name in careful letters. He looked at the heart over the castle gate and thought of his mother's letter. "If you ever stop seeing people as people, that's when you'll be truly poor." He touched the paper lightly, then went to turn off the lights. In the dark, the house exhaled. Not a fortress tonight. Something softer, something alive. "Tomorrow," he told the quiet, "we plant something that can't lie." The next morning, the house was stripped of noise. Reporters still lingered beyond the gates, their lenses glinting through the iron bars. But inside, calm had taken root like a new season. Emily and Chloe ate breakfast at the long table for the first time since the incident. The sunlight caught Chloe's hair and turned it gold. David entered without his usual suit. He wore an open-collar shirt, sleeves rolled, his face lighter than anyone remembered. "I called the lawyers," he said, pouring himself coffee. "The divorce papers will be served today." Emily froze halfway through pouring milk for Chloe. "I didn't mean to cause all this," she said softly. "You didn't cause it," he replied. "You exposed it." She looked at him with quiet disbelief, the kind that came from years of being invisible. Later that morning, a courier arrived, an envelope sealed in gold wax. Rebecca's signature scrawled across the bottom of the divorce petition, but no apology, no acknowledgement. Only a short note. "You'll regret crossing me." David folded it once and set it aside. "I already did," he murmured, "every time I looked away." He spent the afternoon calling architects and accountants, but not for business. He ordered a modest 3-bedroom home in a quiet district built for light and air, not status. He contacted a trustee to establish an education fund in Chloe's name, irrevocable and self-sustaining. When the lawyer asked for the reason of the trust, he answered simply, "Because one act of courage deserves a future." By dusk, the legal papers were filed and Rebecca's belongings were boxed. The house felt lighter again, as if each empty shelf made space for something real. That evening, Chloe ran across the garden barefoot, laughing as Emily chased her through the sprinklers. David watched from the terrace, the kind of smile appearing that came not from triumph, but peace. When Emily looked up at him, wet hair plastered to her cheeks, he felt the strange pulse of gratitude and something gentler, something unspoken. He went down to join them. The three of them built a small garden bed together, their hands muddy, laughter echoing into twilight. When Chloe held up a tiny seedling and asked where it should go, David said, "Where it can grow wild and never be stepped on." As the stars came out, they sat on the grass together, soaked and tired. Emily handed him a towel, her voice low. "You don't have to do all this for us." He met her eyes. "Maybe I'm doing it for me. I need to remember what it's like to protect something that actually matters." The night smelled of earth and sea. Somewhere in the distant city, cameras and whispers still circled his name, but they no longer mattered. He had built fortunes before, now he was learning how to build safety. Inside, Chloe was already asleep on the couch, her damp hair spread across a pillow. David covered her with a blanket, pausing to look at her peaceful face. Then he went to his study, pulled out his mother's letter again, and placed it beside Chloe's drawing of the castle. Two pieces of truth side by side, his past and his promise. He picked up a pen and began writing something new. It wasn't a contract. It was a thank you note. To Emily, to Chloe, to the courage that had found him too late, but not too late to matter. News spread faster than David expected. By the end of the week, the press had changed tone. What began as scandal turned into fascination. CEO files for divorce after domestic abuse scandal, cites moral accountability over reputation. Analysts debated whether it was courage or insanity. His investors watched warily. Yet the public saw something else. A man powerful enough to protect truth over image. Rebecca, however, could not let go. She scheduled interviews with talk shows, claiming she had been framed. The first interview aired on a Friday evening. Her voice was calm, her tears deliberate. "My husband was manipulated by his staff," she said. "He's a good man, but easily deceived." David watched it in silence from his office, Emily sitting opposite him. When it ended, she whispered, "Do you want me to turn it off?" "No," he said. "Let her finish the story she's already lost." The next day, he met his legal team in the conference room overlooking the city. "File an injunction," he said quietly. "I won't tolerate slander, but I won't fight her in tabloids. We'll fight with evidence." Hours later, the footage of Rebecca's abuse, already verified by timestamps and eyewitness statements, was released through official court filings. The same networks that had given her a platform now replayed her cruelty frame by frame. The public's pity turned to disgust. Within 24 hours, she disappeared from social media. Her lawyer issued a short statement. "Mrs. Prescott will no longer comment on personal matters." That evening, David returned home to find Emily in the garden, trimming the rose bushes. She looked up, uncertain. "It's over?" "Yes," he said simply. "For her?" She nodded. "And for you?" He paused. "Not yet, but almost." He looked around the garden, at the beds they'd planted, at Chloe drawing shapes in the dirt. The house that once smelled of polish and emptiness now carried the scent of rain and new soil. He realized he no longer felt the weight of control pressing on his chest. Only quiet. The following morning, his phone buzzed. A journalist who had mocked him months ago texted, "I was wrong. You did the right thing." David smiled faintly, typing nothing back. Some victories didn't need to be announced. Later that week, Rebecca appeared at the gates. No cameras, no entourage, just her, pale and exhausted, clutching a small bag. The guards looked to David for instruction. "Let her in," he said. She stood before him in the driveway, unable to meet his eyes. "I came to apologize," she said quietly. "Not for forgiveness, just I didn't think you'd actually choose them over me." "I didn't choose them over you," he said. "I chose what's right." Tears streaked down her makeupless face. "You always sounded like your mother when you were angry. I used to hate that." "She taught me to see people," he replied. "That's what you never understood." Rebecca exhaled shakily, nodded once, and walked away. She didn't look back. When the gates closed behind her, David stood still for a long time, listening to the wind rush through the open garden. Inside, Chloe was laughing again, Emily humming as she worked. The world had already begun to move on, but he stayed there quietly, letting the last echo of bitterness fade. The arrogant had fallen, but instead of triumph, what he felt was mercy, heavy, cleansing, human. 6 months later, the house remembered how to breathe. The wind off the Pacific no longer sounded like a warning. It sounded like air moving through a living place. In the mornings, sunlight threaded the kitchen where Emily brewed coffee, and Chloe buttered toast with fierce concentration, the knife squeaking across warm bread. David read the paper and never made it past the second paragraph because the conversation at the table was better. A quiz about clouds, a debate about whether cucumbers count as fruit, a plan to plant sunflowers as tall as the house. The 3-bedroom place he bought for them, light, small, with a backyard that drank the rain, was close enough to visit every day, far enough to let them own it. He'd left it unfurnished on purpose and spent a Saturday carrying boxes that held more memory than furniture. The first books Chloe chose for her new shelf, a chipped ceramic cup Emily said tasted like her grandmother's kitchen, a stack of blank canvases for a wall that wanted color. Nothing matched. Everything belonged. The trust quietly paid school fees and the after-school art program where Chloe lost hours to color and came home with paint on her elbows like proof. The first time she stood in front of her class and read a poem, 2 small stanzas about a castle without a gate, Emily filmed it with hands that trembled and David watched it twice alone in his office, then a third time with the sound off, just to feel the courage in the way the girl stood. In the big house on the cliffs, rooms found new names. The trophy room became a library with the door always open. The solarium, where a hand once lifted to strike, turned into a studio where that same light was asked politely to fall on canvas. On a Tuesday, David moved the last of Rebecca's boxes to storage and planted an olive tree where the delivery truck's tires had creased the lawn. The gardener said olives are slow to take. He said slow sounded perfect. Some nights, after meetings that didn't matter the way they once did, David drove to the little house and knocked on the back gate. He'd be ushered into a garden still learning itself. Stakes and twine and labels written in a child's hand. They ate dinner outside, plates balanced on their knees, and Chloe told him the names she'd given the tomato plants: Brave, Patient, and Loud. He asked, why loud? Because it grows fastest, she said, as though that settled it. On the day the divorce finalized, there were no statements. He turned off his phone and showed up with a flat of seedlings and a roll of new hose. Emily laughed when he failed at the nozzle and sprayed his shoes. They planted in silence for a while, dirt under nails, elbows bumping, the kind of work that makes speaking feel optional. When they were done, Chloe pressed a small, uneven clay heart into his palm. "For your desk," she said, suddenly shy. He felt its weight like a key. Later, back at the Cliff House, he placed the heart beside his mother's letter and the drawing of the castle with a door. 3 small truths. He stood a long time without moving, listening to the ocean keep time, and then went outside where the olive's leaves turned their pale undersides to the wind. He didn't think of legacy. He thought of tomorrow's groceries, the library book due Friday, the math worksheet that would need checking, the way a garden insists you show up. He thought of the promise he'd made and kept, to see people as people and to build the kind of place where that seeing could live. When the first rain of autumn came, it arrived clean and without thunder. The olive took the water. The beds at the smaller house darkened and held it. A child slept without flinching. A man, finally, did the same.